We begin with that breaking news from the Bank of Canada this morning. It is holding its key interest rate at 2.25% for a fifth time in a row. The CBC's Angie Seth was listening in to the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, and she has more on the factors Macklem says led to this decision.
He talked about the war in the Middle East, oil prices, gas prices as well, things that the bank cannot necessarily control but need to monitor very, very well. What we see here at home, he talked about the GDP, and I know that at some point we were talking about sort of the issues around a recession, but Tiff Macklem clearly says, the economy is weak, but clearly not in recession. We need to be in sort of much more deeper in order for us to get there. So with that being said, we're sort of monitoring things. He says, the economy hasn't grown in the last year, but it also hasn't shrunk. So they want to sort of maintain a bit of that balance. Consumer price index, they talked about, that's gone up, of course, due to higher food costs, gas prices. That sort of inched up inflation as well. But saying that to raise the rate now, sort of at this stage of the game, in order to balance it all out, raising the rate wouldn't necessarily do that. If they were to raise the rate, then what it might slow the economy, but if they ease the rate as well, then they might be sort of tapping a little bit more into inflation. So it's best to keep things unchanged. Here's more from the governor.
Uncertainty is unusually elevated, and the risks could shift. Monetary policy may need to be nimble. If the United States imposes significant new trade restrictions on Canada, we may need to cut the policy rate further to support economic growth. Alternatively, if the conflict in the Middle East continues and higher energy prices start leading to ongoing generalized inflation, monetary policy may have more work to do. There may be a need for consecutive increases in the policy rate.
And he goes on to say, with specific to the Canadian economy, Arthi, that the economy is working through a structural change, if you will. We've noticed that. It's trade relationships around the sustainability. It's relationships within Canada, outside of Canada, a change in relationship we're seeing also with the United States. And then he talks about the adoption of AI. We've heard a lot about that and sort of what Canada's role is going to be there. Change in demographics, sort of complicating the assessment of the economy. So the bank sort of wants to keep things as they are. As things elevate, the bank will continue to respond. And he also goes on to say that they're committed to keeping inflation close to that 2% target over time, and says looking long term, they do expect to see some level of economic growth. But we're going to sort of see as those reports pan out where the bank is going to stand month over month.
Really sort of trying to contend with that instability and uncertainty, saying that we have to be nimble with our monetary policy. Now, we did talk about the Canadian economy. He says that the Canadian economy is soft. There's no doubt there. But let's talk for a moment about the employment numbers, which he also mentioned, and what we saw in the past month.
Well, we had a bit of an increase, and that sort of was, gave us a little bit of hope there when we were looking at both the employment and employment numbers. Employment numbers, we gained in terms of jobs, 88,000 jobs, so it inched up our employment. We saw employment increase for men and women in that core age demographic, as well as for youth as well. Youth unemployment, those numbers were quite high, sitting at the 14.4%. They dropped by % for the month of May, so showing some positivity in that respect as well, and where we saw jobs as well. More full-time jobs in the private sector, in those sort of main markets economies in Ontario, BC, as well as Alberta. So some strength there we're seeing in the month of May. But again, what is really important through all of this is what we're seeing, all of those factors that the bank mentioned. But are we going to see that continued growth in the employment rate month over month? We've seen it in the month of May. April wasn't so much. We lost a number of jobs. May showed some positivity. We'll see now what we see June into moving further into the summer months.
That is the CBC's Angie Seth right here in studio.